Welcome to the future, you guys. What is up? Happy Friday to everybody that's tuning in live. We're almost on time. We're going to get there one day. We're almost there. Oh, okay. On today's show, we're going to be talking to legendary title designer, founding member, one of the founding members of Imaginary Forces, none other than Karin Fong is in the house, you guys. I can't tell you how excited I am to talk about Karin or speak to Karin because we've been trying to coordinate this for many years. I've known Karin for a really long time. And we originally met, and we'll talk about this later, at RGA back at the old Cat and Fiddle building, right?
That's
Something
true.
Like that.
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
At least 20 years ago.
At least.
Here's some things that I know about Karin. She's a smart lady because she went to Yale. What up with that? We're going to talk about that. I mentioned she's the founding member of Imaginary Forces. She's had 5 nominations and 1 Emmy win. Super impressive, you guys. Her work has been featured at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, the Pasadena Museum of California Art, the Wexner Center, the Walker Art Center, and a whole bunch more. She's worked on main titles such as Boardwalk Empire, Black Sails, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, Bedazzled, Rubicon, Dead Man on Campus, and so many more titles I can't even name them. And equally talented, she's directed a bunch of TV commercials for Herman Miller, for God of War, for Target, for Honda, and a whole bunch of other things. Now, if you're not familiar with her and her work, I'm going to give you a quick preview. Let's just watch in awe. Here we go. Amazing. So beautiful. Now, Karin, these are stills, but they look like they're moving.
Must be that editing job.
That's a sign of a good frame, man. It just moves by itself.
Right.
Okay, and I also want to congratulate her on becoming a 2018 AIGA medalist.
You can medal in design.
What is up? Did you get an actual medal?
I did. I was hoping there was like a string to wear it around my neck and like an anthem being played, but it was lovely. It was in a box.
Okay, luckily though, there was a little film put together for this, and so we're gonna watch this. Here we go.
I would love to be the kind of designer who could make something that's just sheer beauty, but I need an idea or a concept or a hook to hang the design on. A main title can really set the tone of what you're entering. It's part of the ritual of seeing a movie or a television show. The rhythm, the cadence. There's something that gets your heart thumping. We could distill the essence of the content and make a metaphor for it, or almost an appetizer course. RGALA was very well established. Bob Greenberg was running the company, and he was taking the company towards interactive, but we always liked our focus being in the film, entertainment, content world. I remember Kyle coming by and saying, if we broke off from RGA and just kept our own company, would you come along? And I was like, oh yeah, you know. Kyle Cooper had just done his groundbreaking Title 7, and that brought us a flood of work. So many people were interested in a studio that deliberately would elevate film and entertainment and television with the power of graphic design. When you're working as a title designer, you're really taking the lead in the ideas and the aesthetic, and often you're leading a team. More and more, there'd be more live action to reckon with. We were increasingly pitching me and my other colleagues who were designers or creative directors as the directors now, because we wanted to take care of the whole package. I design and direct all kinds of film and video projects, primarily in shorter format. Anything from a film title to a dream sequence within a film to a television commercial to an introduction to a video game. I might write up several different treatments, make several different storyboards, maybe do a test. At some point, there's usually a favorite, and we'd get it to some sort of shooting board or shot list. And then we go into production, which could mean anything from shooting it, creating the art, and animating it, starting to make the thing. The trademark of our work is going back and forth between the analog and the digital. My favorite kind of projects are where somebody says to me, I don't know exactly which shots were CG and which were live action. When you're dealing in animation, you keyframe and you know when this hits there. When you're dealing with an actor or a set or weather, there are things that you can't predict, but that often is a really good thing. People have said to me who have worked over 20 years in a place, what? Don't you want something new? I'm like, I'm doing something new right now.
All right, you guys, that was super impressive. I couldn't hear a single word, but I hope everybody tuning in on Facebook and on YouTube can hear that.
It's muted for us, so
It is muted for us. Okay, you guys, in case you're wondering, why is Chris so dressed down today? I'm not dressed down. I'm dressed for the occasion. Look, I'm wearing Imaginary Forces orange shirt. You guys can see this? See that? See the Herman Miller? I go all out.
I like it. Theme dressing.
Let's
I like
just do this. Enough talk. Let's roll the titles! Ah! Look, we rolled out the red carpet for you, Karin. Welcome to the show.
And the red T-shirt. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. We have been trying to get this together for some time now, and I'm happy to be here.
Many, many years. Now, those of you guys that I'm sure there's a bunch of people watching on YouTube and on Facebook. You guys can go ahead and start smashing your questions in there. Aaron and Matthew and Eric will be monitoring your questions in a little bit, and we'll get to that. I first want to start by setting the stage as to how we met. The first time we met, I was just a young pup, just graduated school, started my design studio, and I was called in to work with Kyle. I worked on a few projects, but the one that I think is connecting us is the island of Dr. Moreau.
I just told you that I almost brought in those storyboards. I couldn't find them in my garage, but but they're there somewhere.
I still have them, actually, but I didn't think to bring them in either. But so I come in, and this was brand new to me. Totally brand new, because I didn't even know that graphic designers did these kind of things. And I'm just having the time of my life, just playing with type. And then I see this super impressive building, RGA at that time, and then later on Imaginary Forces. What was that like for you at the very beginning, and how did you get into this industry to begin with?
Well, it's funny. I've always been interested in film and making things. Like when I was a kid, I'd make these Super 8 films with cut paper. You know, you like cut something out, move it, click it a couple frames, move it again, get your hand in there. I didn't have any editing equipment, but I just loved, taking it to the lab, coming back and seeing this bouncing ball. And then when I was in college, my senior project, I think I kind of jerry-rigged it so I could be able to do more animation, was an animated alphabet book. And by then, there was that great program, Macromind Director, which it really isn't a animation program per se, but you could script animations, and you could see that ball bounce within a minute, which was like complete magic to me. And I just got hooked on all that. And I did this alphabet book for my thesis project, which got the attention of a professor, Michael Rock, who said, your work is really cinematic. And that was like kind of news to me, because I was like doing these hand-drawn doodles, and I was doing these collages that would animate. And I thought cinematic meant, like Lawrence of Arabia, like you needed really good, widescreen photography, and that's what cinematic was. But what he was talking about was, like if you can think in interesting transitions and make a story come alive with, sequencing, that's a very cinematic way of thinking. And he actually suggested when I graduated that I go see Kyle Cooper, who was then at RGA, our Greenberg Associates, and doing title design work. And I remember, I think I still have it somewhere, like a little note saying, title design, ? And I had not really heard of that as a branch of design per se, although funnily enough, I did do title design for a student show when I was at school. A friend of mine, Hugo Perez, did this student soap opera, and he was the one who actually introduced me to the Goldfinger titles, the Bond ones. And he said, "Had you ever seen those? They projected the names on the bodies." And I said, "No, but here, I'll make some slides, and we'll got a slide projector, and we'll project them on your body." So I was doing like little side projects that were all like totally related. But it wasn't until I went and learned about our Greenberg Associates and learned about their legacy in titles like Superman or Alien that I thought of it. Oh wow, there's actually a design studio that does that as part of their work. And I should say, like, before becoming a designer at R. Greenberg, I had already, another teacher of mine suggested I go to WGBH Boston, which in the day, was really instrumental in incorporating design into a television language. The VP of design there, Chris Pullman, also was a teacher at Yale. And he, really was one of the pioneers in the sort of broadcast design and branding that we see today. And so I went over there and I actually worked on a show as an animator called Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Oh, wow.
Which, and funnily enough, it's PBS, right? So they actually used Macromind director as their animation program, which I'm sure all you animators know, or it's really not a broadcast animation tool, but thus was the budgets, and I learned all kinds of tricks there. Like, my job was to like invent ways that the villains would steal national monuments. Mm-hmm. And so, but there would be always these limitations because we'd only have a couple days to do each animation. They were like little animated interstitials for the PBS game show. And so, you learn tricks like, we'll only show the guy running from the top, from the waist up, because you only have to animate their arms then, and you don't have to do a full body run cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's because it's you're doing things, and that kind of thinking like follows you all through your career, because you're always trying to think of ways to kind of do it. No matter how big your budget is, it seems like there's always ways you're trying to do it for less. So be creative in that way.
All right. I was doing a little research on you, and I found this quote. I want to share it with everybody. So I'm going to read it, and before I read it, I'm prepping you for this, and I want your reaction, if you can shed some insight to this. In that, when you and I got out of school, there wasn't really a motion design curriculum because that term hadn't even been invented. So we're talking about traditional designers or filmmakers or other people who are finding their way into this field. So here we go. Let me read this quote to you. It says here, thank you. First job, it was sink or swim, and I was gasping for breath, taking home the manuals, learning how to light and compose a frame, design storyboards, all the things that led to directing both live action and animation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Wow, there wasn't a site like the Futur like that for me when I started.
Right, the kids today they're all spoiled because there are so many resources out there.
It's amazing that there's videos for everything. I mean, always we're on YouTube learning, how to tie a bow tie, or or how to make a, program a game or something, and or just walk us through the manuals. But it was sort of sink or swim. I remember starting eventually after WGBH. I did start with Kyle, working under Kyle Cooper, who was a huge influence and mentor for my career at RGA LA in Los Angeles. And I wasn't. We were expected a lot of the times to make comps and Photoshop boards, and it wasn't part of my. I had learned Photoshop in school, and I certainly used it at the television station, but I didn't know all that I needed to know to make a beautiful, to make a beautiful frame. And so I would be taking these manuals home at night, and this is gonna date me and you, Chris. But this was Photoshop before they came up with layers.
Right, I remember that.
So you would save all these different, files, and really have to know how to do the alpha mats, and technically it was a lot. It was a process that was more unforgivable. And so, but it's the same principles. They just include all those principles and sort of the later features. But taking home those books or Illustrator and playing around, with like different percentages of gradients. I think the thing that Kyle always encouraged us to do was like figure out the lighting of a frame. And I think that was something that Photoshop was an incredible tool. Coming out of a more traditional print graphic design program, which was a little bit more, you dealt with photography, but you didn't manipulate it as much. The idea that you're manipulating light and simulating how that would work in a cinematic environment was super interesting, and also a skill completely worth, doing competently for your boards. I mean, we'd always look at boards and see like what a difference. Like Michael Riley, one of our colleagues at our office, was expert at I remember lighting frames. I'd always look at his keyframes and think, oh wow, that lighting just makes that frame come alive. So definitely a sink or swim situation too, though. There's nothing, and this is what I encourage anybody getting into this, and they want to learn the tools. It's sort of like invent a deadline for yourself. We had these deadlines that are, were very demanding then as they are now. And it's just nothing like just taking it and trying to get it done within that time, and then making yourself, kind of learn the tool through doing.
I'd like to take a moment at this point in time to do a little public service announcement for all the young people watching this channel who are complaining, like my kids are like, oh, Dad, your laptop is so old, you need a new one, or I need the latest version of this, and they want to buy a $5,000 computer. And this is where I like to say, sometimes the restraints or the constraints that you have with budget, project parameters, timeline, software tools, it actually is a great way to make you think and be more creative. And I hear you're working on Photoshop, whatever version that might be, with one layer. And I remember back then, one level of undo. And also, if you use Adobe Illustrator back then, you could not work in the preview mode. You can only work on the outline mode, and then you'd have to hit Command Y, and it would render the thing so you can see if that was the red or blue and if those colors work together. But that never stopped you from coming up with great ideas and designing frames and learning how to light things so that they're cinematic. And I remember when I was first working on storyboards, the whole notion of painting a frame, like painting with light and getting it to look filmic, that was a brand new concept to me at that time, because prior to that, everything was super flat, done in Quark Express or Adobe Illustrator, right? So sometimes you got to let go of these tools and chasing that, because it's a never-ending chase. If you work on the fundamentals, you can do incredible, legendary things and win possibly an Emmy or something like that.
Or a medal.
A medal? You should have wore your medal here. That would have been rad.
Right?
You just hold it up like that. Is it a big medal?
It's a medal. It's medal size. It comes in a box and it has a little key too, so I can lock it.
How does one win and become a medalist?
I guess there's a committee. It was a total surprise to me. I didn't even.
You weren't lobbying for it?
Oh no, there's no. Yeah, exactly. Campaigning like an Oscar campaign. No, but to your point, Chris, it's so funny. I was just talking to somebody at IF the other day. I was like, I really wanted to master the airbrush when I was a teenager.
Oh, me too.
Right? Because
Yes.
that was how you got your designs on a T-shirt or something. Like you would, the people would airbrush, right? I never mastered it. It was terrible. I couldn't figure out the frisket. My compressor was never smooth enough. Like I kind of had this jerry-rig airbrush thing. But I just remember too, though, there is a magic of. I remember getting into Photoshop and wow, a smooth gradient was a tool I could suddenly have, which I could never have with the
That was
airbrush,
like
'cause I
genius.
was
If
not
you can
good.
get a nice gradient,
Right?
it was awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was like a little bit of that magic too, though, that wow, I could work with this. Just like when I first discovered the ball could bounce within a few minutes and not take a week and go to a lab and have to do that. So there are some things but to your point too, it's a translatable thing. Like there are real world things like learning how to draw, for instance, or do things by hand. It's never a waste of time because it does translate over to these programs. I think there's definitely a correlation.
All right. So now I have a question for you. Look, you're a native California.
I am.
Right? Okay. I got to ask you, did your mom and dad, are they behind this idea of you becoming a designer? Or were they always there, or did you have to win them over?
They were always so supportive.
Wow.
Of me. So I was the kid who could draw when I was little. I remember my first projects. My dad. I remember drawing projects and my dad taking them to work and Xeroxing them on the Xerox machine, which again I thought was magic. Wow, now I have 20 copies of this thing. My Christmas. I remember the snowman playing a piano I had done. I was like, this little light bulb comes out. We can make more than one copy and you can send them as cards and. I remember my dad bringing me home sets of markers and just really both of my parents encouraging me to do artwork. My childhood dream was to be a greeting card artist.
Oh, wow.
We
need different dreams.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Young Karin Fong is like, I just love to make greeting cards all day.
Yeah. It was so funny because that film you just showed, they came to our office. I was digging up all this stuff, old work and stuff. I was like, oh wow! And I found all these greeting cards. I showed them. I apparently didn't make the cut of the film. Clearly not. Maybe that that was good that somebody dissuaded me, or I got on this other animation thing. But I would remember my mom would go shopping and drop me off at the Hallmark store next to the supermarket, and I would just go and study all the cards. But I think there was something I really liked. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a fan of terrible bad puns, and I make terrible bad puns all the time. But I always liked you would have a joke in the beginning, or you'd have a illustration or a picture, and then you would open it and it would pay off in some way in the inside. And I think that's something, that little aha moment is sort of like something that I've always thought about doing. And now I think translated that to more emotion design or cinematic filmic way. But the sequencing and sort of like this little surprise, I think is something that I've always been interested in.
Well, in an alternate universe, there's another Karin Fong running around doing amazing, beautiful greeting cards.
Exactly.
I'm sure of it. Maybe that's something that you can do when you retire, right?
maybe, or probably better, business of. She's probably writing paperless post or something.
Okay,
real
I do
business.
know that you love bad puns, and so we're gonna play a little game. So we're introducing a new segment just for you. It's
Just
called
for
Bad
me?
Puns. Yeah, it's
Oh,
called Bad
I like
Puns.
it.
All right,
Hashtag
you
bad
ready?
puns. Okay.
Okay, so it's a game. I'll give you 5 riddles.
Okay.
And then there's some really bad puns. So our studio, the audience that's tuning in, you guys can smash whatever you think the answer is, okay? Here we go. Here's your first one. Let me get the game show. Here we go.
Oh, gosh.
Here's 5 questions, right? What's the difference between a hippo and a Zippo? Where's my podcast?
Somebody online help me out here.
Okay. Let me
Do I get a lifeline?
You get no lifelines.
No, I can't call a friend.
If you can get 3 of the riddles right, I'll give our audience a special prize. Okay. I'll give you some timer music.
I need a.
Where's my Jeopardy music?
This needs to be a test question so I can. The difference is
What's the difference between a hippo and a Zippo? Okay, I feel like you're not going to be able to answer
Okay,
that.
no. Let's give me
Okay.
There we go.
I need a warm-up question.
Here we go. The answer is a hippo is really heavy and a Zippo is a little lighter.
Okay, I got it. I'm like, I was like thinking typographically. I'm like, the letter. I'm like, the letter Z?
You're thinking too hard. Okay. Next one. Here we go.
I'm
Question number 2.
Okay, got it.
Question number 2.
I'm ready now. I'm ready.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, okay.
What kind of room has no doors or windows?
Mushroom.
Oh,
yeah, all right.
Where's the bell? There we go. Yeah, she got it. Okay,
I
that's
just need
one.
to warm up.
Wow. Okay, she got 1. I got to keep score here, you guys. All right, here we go. Next
We're
one.
going to get the prize, you guys.
You have to get 3 right, okay? What goes up and never comes down?
Oh, that's your age.
Oh!
Yeah.
This is too easy.
Too easy. These aren't really puns, Chris, but that's okay. The mushroom one.
I know. It was desperate.
The riddles,
it was early this
I
morning.
like it. I like this NPR kind of feeling.
Yeah, who knows, right? We'll just try
little
something.
shorts thing going on.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Question. Okay, what tastes better than it smells?
Oh.
What tastes better than it smells?
Your tongue? No.
Yes! You
Really?
got it! Oh my God! You won a prize for that!
I want a prize. I get to pick something from behind the door.
Yes, you do. Well, very good.
Door
we have
number
one
3,
more for
please.
you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. Here we go.
Okay,
Here we go.
okay. Bonus.
Here we go. Bonus. This is it. Maybe you just need to warm up. You're very good at this. Okay. What starts with E, ends with E, and contains 1 letter?
Oh, Chris, come on. It's an envelope.
Too easy?
Come on,
Oh
man.
gosh, you're so good. Where's the sound effect? There we go. All right, I'm gonna give you some applause for
All
this.
right. Saved face. The Hippo Zippo thing threw me off.
All right, guys.
I rallied.
She's very good. Hashtag Queen of Puns right now, guys. Go ahead and tweet that out. Drop it in. So I got some more bad puns for you. Okay, this one I'll just read them. Here we go. This one says, "I'm a big fan of whiteboards. I find them quite remarkable."
I'm like, where'd you get that quote? I hate whiteboards, but anyway.
Okay, I asked my French friend if she likes to play video games. She said, "Oui." You have to cut it on the screen. You have to cut it on the screen.
Yeah,
Erica.
right. Okay,
Erica,
yeah,
come on.
right.
Last time I did that, you yelled at me for showing your screen.
Oh, see, that's
You have
legit.
to read my mind. You have to read my mind, girl. Okay, here we go. The machine at the coin factory just suddenly stopped working with no explanation. It doesn't make any sense. Now, these are the kind of puns you like, right?
I like that.
They're horrible.
Yeah,
They're so
I try
bad.
to sell the clients whatever I can, but
Really?
you know, to their dismay.
Okay, I have a couple more. Here we go. An atom loses an electron. It says, "Man, I really got to keep an eye on
I
them."
like that one. That's pretty highbrow, Chris.
It is a little highbrow. Okay, that's why I had to cut to the graphic. Otherwise, somebody listening won't even understand. Okay, here's another one for you. A man sued an airline company after it lost his luggage. Sadly, he lost his case. Oh,
That's a groaner.
Groan. Do you have a groan sound effect?
I probably
You gotta
do.
expand your library.
Here we go. That's John Roth. Okay. I'm only friends with 25 letters of the alphabet. I don't know why.
That's
Come
good.
on,
That's
that's
a,
good,
yeah,
right?
that's
Okay,
a type
that's it.
That's a type one. I thought
Yes.
right.
But it wasn't a riddle, so I don't know.
Right.
All right. Now, okay, enough applause. Yes, it's enough. Calm down. It wasn't that good of a segment. Okay. I want to ask you another question here. I think I found out that you were a cheerleader in high school.
You have been on the intro ones.
I have.
You have been.
I was up very
You've
early
been
this
digging
morning.
deep. You've been
I-
doing it. I was a cheerleader.
Do you have a picture of that? Can we find a picture of that somewhere, you think?
I could follow up for your side, but I'm
know
sure
what?
there was. Did you get? What did you get? What?
No, but I want you to talk about it. What high school did you go to?
I went to Oak Park High School.
Oak Park High
about
School.
45 minutes from here.
Okay.
So it's Southern California.
All right, all right.
Everybody, Agora. And talk about it. You know, I could give you a cheer.
You
Let's
give us a
see,
cheer.
let's
That'd be
see.
awesome. Yes, give us a cheer. Do it.
Let's see. What was that? You know, there's like a lot of rhythmic cheers. Let's see. Do you remember the Cookie Monster? Did your high school do the Cookie Monster cheer?
Heck if I know.
The-
I wasn't
No,
a person
you weren't-
filled with
no,
spirit. I
no.
barely attended any of those rallies.
You didn't rally?
Yes.
The Cookie Monster says that the Eagles are the great big cookie at the top of the jar. That's a good
Don't
one,
you have to
right?
do that with spirit hands
Very,
or something?
the great big cookie, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's let's see. There's people in the front. Let me hear you grunt. Yeah, there's a lot of like call and response
Right.
one, right? I'm trying to think of a good one.
Why don't you do this and Aaron and I will respond. Aaron, get ready, dude.
Okay, I'll do people
Right.
in the front.
Okay, go ahead.
People in the front, let me hear you grunt. People in the back, show me where it's at.
Oh, we just grunt the whole time?
Yeah, it's all grunting.
Oh, it's just all grunt.
You're overthinking it.
Okay, I'm sorry, my bad.
Oh gosh, what's the next line? People left and right, show you're out of sight. People. People. People.
Aaron, you're supposed to join me
Yeah,
here.
it's two grunts
come
at the
on,
end.
man.
People. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so what compels a young Karen who's into art and drawing also to be a cheerleader?
I guess it was just something I wanted to try. Interestingly, my graphic design interest carried over because I don't know your high school, but we always had in the middle of the game in the halftime, you made a big, huge banner sign that was, as big, I don't know, 10 feet tall or something with the other team's mascot or whatever. And then the cheerleaders would hold it on either side. We'd be on each other's shoulders and holding it. And then the football players run through it, run through the poster and, demolish it during, as they rush the field at halftime, right? So, I was in charge, naturally. I was the cheerleader graphic designer and all of those posters. And I went to a very small school, so everybody went to the football games and, went to the basketball and volleyball games. We cheered at all the games. We were so small, we did girls volleyball and we did basketball. We did all the sports, and it was my extracurricular.
You had a lot of spirit.
I had a lot of spirit. I was like,
What were you?
I was into school, So I mean, finally, I never I didn't go out for the varsity squad. I chose to be yearbook editor instead. So
Oh, okay.
So true to
You're right.
True to form.
You got to revert back to what feels right.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I just that was my calling.
I got a flyaway here. I can't control my own cabling here. I don't know what's going on. Let me get rid of this. Okay, so I have some questions here, like on a more serious note, Karen.
Right.
On a more serious note.
What about not pun?
Yeah, not no more puns.
No
for,
more
for the
puns.
time.
No more puns for prizes.
Yes. Talk to me about your process. Like when you're working on a big title, how is it that you come up with? How do you come up with your ideas?
I think the most important thing in coming up with ideas is just immersing yourself in the subject matter. So whether it be a title, so that would be the story, so the scripts, the story, a cut, if it's a movie, or a show, the period around it, the characters, just knowing as much as you can about the themes and the actual story that is being told. And if you're, directing for a brand or or doing content for, any number of foundations or brands or, or clients, you just really dig in. Like, you mentioned Herman Miller, for instance, and I see you're wearing your lovely Herman Miller shirt.
I am.
That was such a treat because we, to research for a short 2-minute film we were doing with them, we went to their factory. I walked around the floor, which is incredible. I have to actually just plug that. Like, if you see how this furniture is made, you will. It was actually a spot to encourage people not to buy the real thing and not buy knockoffs. And if you see the quality and everything that goes into making these pieces that are spec to the original designer's specs, you would see that quality. So being able to see that, going to their archives, getting a sense of their corporate history, just actually being there and just getting as much material as possible. And that was amazing. Not very many corporations can do this, but they had an archivist who, you would ask for the original blueprints of a chair that the Eames worked on, and he would come back out and have them. And he would have like the original royalty letter that George Nelson signed when he was designing the table, right? It's like this, I was a kid, we were kids. I worked on this project with Grant Lau, and we were like kids in the candy store looking at all this stuff. And, because usually it's kind of like, do you have a copy of your logo? And then sometimes people are like, well, can't you pull it online? And you're like, no, like this instead, Steve Frickholm would be like, oh, the logo, which version? And then he'd proceed to show you the whole progression of the logos. And that's a, rare but great treat to take, and luckily we're in position to take advantage of that and take a lot of photos and slides and get material sent to us, and that ultimately made sort of like this heritage film for them. That's an example of doing that commercially, but it's the same whether you do that commercially or if you're working on something like a title recently finished called Counterpart. And that is a very interesting story because it takes place, there's kind of a time shift. It takes place in the present, but it looks like it takes place in the past, and there's undertones of like East Germany and the idea that there are parallel worlds. There's a lot of themes about alienation in there. So understanding, talking to Justin Marks, the showrunner, and understanding emotionally what he was trying to convey with the show, but also understanding and reading the script and seeing, visiting the sets, being able to, be a part of that world was immensely helpful in thinking of ideas. So I think all roundabout say your first idea of like where the ideas come from, I think it's like, so many ideas come from the actual material itself. I mean, getting familiar with it and then being able to synthesize it.
I remember you wrote an article, I think it was for AIGA, and I loved it. It was called A Moment for Surprise and discovering that aha moment. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought it was great when you wrote that many, many years ago.
Yeah,
I'm thinking, like,
these are so old, Chris. Oh my God,
hey, man,
I can't believe
I am a little bit old, all right?
It's like we're going down.
A lot of moisturizer, but I am pretty old.
Yeah, no, I think the idea of an aha moment, like, so Andrea Codrington, who's a writer, had contacted me, and she had actually done an interview with me at one point, and I said, what I like is like being able to design a payoff moment or like a moment of surprise, or maybe you feel like you're looking at something this way and it just shifts just a little bit, I love optical illusions, like all those optical illusions, like is it a bunny or is it a duck or is that an old lady or a young lady, like this, like or even just Escher like things where it's like positive and negative space. I think are really interesting that your brain tries to like see both sides and you can kind of push it either way. And so she had asked me to write this article about designing surprise. What are examples that I really thought did this. I remember quoting, I remember really, bringing people's attention, or I was really looking a lot at Michel Gondry, because there's that wonderful video he did. Was it Let Forever Be? I forgot the title, where you feel like something's flat, but you realize it's in dimension. It looks like it's a video switcher, but it's actually analog in real life. But always that play between 2D and 3D, or what's on screen or what's reality. I think that's really interesting. And then, there's elaborate ideas like that where you're playing with, and there's other ones where I try to do, a lot with scale, like trying to feel like you're close, but maybe you're also vast. I think there's interesting things there. I remember one of the first projects I saw Kyle do at RGA was True Lies, and it was a very simple premise where but I've always remembered it because like it was the letters true cut into blocks.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, right? And then all it did was like shift a little, and then that same blocks, they were cap letters, switched to lies. And I think like, again, like for that Escher sort of like seeing things one way and then another is really interesting. And it's carried through too. Like I remember one of the reasons Stig, who was the director of the game God of War, wanted us to do the kind of dream sequence interstitials or cinematics of his game is that he had seen our title for The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And we did a lot of transitions with silhouettes that you realize were really part of something else, or you'd see a shape and it would turn. As he would say, like, he likes those kind of transitions. He was attracted to working with us because he liked those kind of transitions where you think it's a face, but it's really a mountain range, or, and like just surprising the viewer of where you were. And I think that's what my professor, Michael Ruck, was talking about when he first said my work was cinematic. It's like these different ways of bringing you into cinema. Like cinema is one of the art forms that really brings you into different spaces with transitions like that.
All right, so I think there's a large group of our audience that may not even know some of the things that you're talking about or referencing things. So I'm going to ask you just talk down. Just make it a little simpler for us, little simple-minded people, okay?
Yeah, Chris, I wanted someone...
right on cue! I say somebody of low intelligence, and Aaron's like, yeah, that would be me.
Thanks.
No, perfect. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you. Appreciate that intro, Chris.
Yeah.
Just that people were asking, is there any kind of predominant theme for today's episode so they could focus their questions around that?
Well, you guys must have been tuning in late. Karen's an incredible main title designer. She's worked on a bunch of things. So if you're interested in main title design, motion graphics, or process, you know what? Let's do this. There's never enough time to talk about her wonderful work. So let's do this. Let's look at this behind the scenes photo here. Maybe you can talk us through it. Here you are with Steve Buscemi. And
Buscemi?
Yeah.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Why don't you say it?
Buscemi, I think.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
I know you're an expert at saying his name, Aaron.
Sorry.
Anyway, so you're out on the beach. You're shooting this thing for Boardwalk Empire.
Yes.
I love that show. So what's happening here?
Here, I think, what's it? I'm looking at the picture.
Where are you guys? At the beach?
We are at the beach. It is a beach in New Jersey, doubling for supposedly Atlantic City, where the show takes place. But it's on the Jersey Shore, and the hottest day of the summer, and he's wearing like a three-piece vintage wool suit. Costumes and production design, amazing on that show. Like, we even got vintage socks for that shot. But I don't know if you know the title sequence, but there's a shot of his shoes. But it was very important that he also wear a particular vintage sock. The detail's amazing. And we were out there shooting the shots for the main title sequence. And here I am, probably pointing to some storyboard. I can't see what's in my hand.
You're doing that thing that directors do.
Yeah.
Look at that over there.
I'm quote directing. I'm like, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you're with Steve Buscemi, I guess. And he's playing Nucky at the show. It's like, he's the character. So it's kind of like just getting the framing and the shots. It's kind of like, well, he would smoke like this, right? Yep. But very nice guy. I co-directed that with Michelle Doherty. We had our VisFX people there to do all those bottles and the surf that we later, of course, augmented in CG. I don't know if people know the title sequence, but it basically centers around this idea that this character is the sort of kingpin and central character of this whole show. And everything around him changes. He's sort of like the eye of the storm. And also, very importantly, it sets the stage for the show Atlantic City being very important because it became a smuggler's haven during Prohibition. And so literally the future is in alcohol. So he looks out towards the horizon and he sees hundreds and hundreds of liquor bottles coming his way, kind of like symbolizing the sort of surreal moment that metaphorically symbolizes that the importance of Prohibition and all his criminal activities, and sort of his future and what his destiny will lie in. So that was an interesting project. That concept wasn't our first one. I was all set to shoot a montage sequence of their set, which was, I mentioned, gorgeous. Like, they had taffy machines and shops that you go in and out of the whole boardwalk. They had built a whole boardwalk in Brooklyn. behind these shipping containers. So it had this very magical sort of Narnia feel. You go behind these shipping, and it's like this whole period piece of boardwalks with shops. And, like I'm sure many of you have been on sets here in LA and or worked on them, and a lot of them. No? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
we do this all the time, Karen.
No,
of
but
course.
like Universal Studios or something, for instance,
yeah,
right?
all the time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, or
The back lot.
No,
Aaron,
but
we were
like
just there
a
the other day.
tour, like a tour, right?
Yeah.
Like you've been to a back lot, and usually
Universal Studios, maybe.
you're exactly. That's what I mean. So like you go there, and you might be a little disappointed, right? Because you can't really go into all the stores, right? And like they're just fronts. But in this case, they had built out all the interiors, so you could go into them and shoot.
Wow.
You could shoot anywhere in the lingerie store or the bar or the So it was a fully, functioning set, and so I was totally excited to like just use that as this great montage. As we know, HBO does amazing montages for a lot of their shows, and then it was like, we need something that's a little bit that might make people sit up and take notice more, which is a great, actually, challenge for a designer. But I wasn't expecting it because, we were prepping to do the shoot and everything. And then finally we brainstormed some more, and we had some more sessions where we're seriously just like sketching down ideas and writing ideas with Terry Winters, the showrunner, and his team. And then we finally had this sketch, we had this idea of like, what if he looks out and he sees these liquor bottles? And then we expanded from that to make the sequence. But it's kind of like we found one central metaphor that then we grew out into the sequence. And I think that's sort of an important way of how I design.
So I have a business question on the practical side. Had you been awarded the job at this point? Because it sounds like there's this collaborative spirit between you and... what's the name? Terry Winters?
Yeah, exactly. Showrunner.
Showrunner,
yes.
yes.
The creator,
And you guys were going back and forth, so you must have secured the job at this point already.
Yeah. So we had gotten the job, and again, like we were ready to shoot this other job.
Oh, I see.
And then it was, wait a second, he was rethinking it and rethinking it with HBO, and they decide, wow, this is a big show for them, and could we do something a little bit more provocative, I guess. And when you hear something like that, of course it's good news, because you want to do something that is provocative. Ideally, I think that's more challenging. But of course, when you're kind of like you have your baby, right? Like you're getting ready to actually do this other thing. It takes you a while to reset and see that as a good thing.
Here's another behind the scenes photo from God of War, and I'm going to show you two photos. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about this. So here you are on set. I think somewhere in that group of people, you're in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and then there's this other photo.
I'm that one. Yeah, I'm there with the hat, the bounce with the rim line with the red there.
Oh, you're in there somewhere?
Yeah, the next one.
Oh, the next one. Okay.
Yeah, there I am.
Right
there I am on the bottom right.
Okay,
I
you're in the
recognize that hat
foreground.
anywhere.
What are you doing there?
I'm crouching down. Somebody before me, probably the DP's probably before me with a monitor or something. I'm shooting Spartan warriors in beautiful Simi Valley, doubling as Sparta, Greece. And it is a trailer for God of War Ascension, which had, they wanted a sort of movie-style trailer, and the goal with this was to make Kratos, who is, if anybody knows the video game God of War,
Love
is
it.
basically a violent killing machine. But in this game, they were kind of pushing more of the story side and his more human qualities, like. You kind of like get behind the motivation of like, why am I killing machine? Oh, because Ares tricked me to kill my wife and daughter, which would probably make anybody pretty messed up. So our teaser trailer actually was an origin story, and it's kind of to get at that emotional core. And because getting to an emotional core, I really wanted to do it as live action, which is kind of a flip, right? Because usually we're doing a lot of stylized animated things for a live action show, or and then this was actually a video game, and then we're going to flip the teaser trailer and a lot of that marketing into live action. So that was a fun challenge.
Could we show that photo again of the
Yeah.
Could you talk about a little bit, like, what did you do here on this set? Like,
Well, I was the director of the commercial, so that involved this job came in actually before they had an exact concept. So I was living in New York at the time and working, and we were at IF at New York, and we had actually done a lot of things for this game already. We had done God of War 3, a lot of the cinematics. We've done their title sequences. We were doing also some work for cinematic work for God of War 4 Ascension. And so this idea of having a big kind of, I think these ran on the Super Bowl or around that time. The idea, so we were pitching ideas and writing ideas of, wow, okay, if they want this idea that Kratos is a very human anti-hero, why don't we show his origin story then? Why didn't we show how he became the god of war, basically? And so it was about designing the spot, writing the spot with a team, of course. I had a great concept art by Alan Williams and Jeremy Cox was our VisView supervisor, and we were trying to figure out the central metaphor. In this case, it was the game is called From Ashes, and so it's a hero that rises from sort of like the ashes of his dead wife and daughter, and these ashes coat his skin, and he becomes the god of war. And so it's just showing that story and using that metaphor. And then in terms of what I was doing on that set, then you board it, and you're so then I basically function as a director when it comes to commercials, or a lot of short format content. So I'm now then operating that function of making all the directorial decisions, from casting to costumes to styling, production design, and ultimately directing the shoot.
Okay, so the internet is going a little bananas now that we put up God of War and we're talking about God of War.
Now
are
we're
you
getting
kidding me?
specifics, and they're
Yeah,
not talking about
they're
dumb.
super excited.
We need some puns about God of War.
Okay, so there's a lot of things going on. So I remember seeing that spot, thinking, "Wow, that was super cool." I think in it, don't they all kind of turn to dust or something?
Yes,
And it's like ashes, right?
Yes,
It's super cool.
Yeah, so he picks up his daughter, and she just crumbles into ash.
I love that
Yeah.
shot. So she's a real person, live action, and somewhere in there's a visual effects shot.
Yes.
And then using some kind of particle simulation, she disintegrates in his hand, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then that was a real person, because I think I talked to somebody who was there with you. Kratos was cast, and you found like the perfect Kratos, like in real life, right?
Yes, I was looking at all these bodybuilder types. So that was the challenge. It's like,
tough job
okay,
there,
could
huh?
we? Yeah, exactly. And but there was a question of like, wow, he has, as many superheroes or these kind of characters, of very exaggerated proportions. So we found somebody who was great, Brandon, who was this. Obviously he's on the cover of bodybuilding magazines and everything. So that physique was great. But we also had, I was really a little nervous about translating Kratos into live action, because the fans are so passionate about this game, as is any of these heroes, and like to mess it up would just be like terrible. Like it wouldn't fly under the radar. It would, So I knew that had to be right. And so we were very much in touch with Sony PlayStation about that. Like, what are the qualities? Like his nose is very distinctive, and so we had a fantastic makeup, team that fabricated the.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
As a prosthetic nose?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And and just developing all the makeup for him. I wish you could find on the internet what he looks like, because he's a Swedish blonde guy, this bodybuilder.
What's his name?
Brandon, and I'm totally blanking on his last name. Sorry, Brandon.
It's gonna be tough for us to find out.
Well, we I have photos.
I will try.
Behind the scenes. But he's this kind of blonde, Nordic person, and but he, we styled him, obviously having the makeup like Kratos and a prosthetic, and what I was looking for when casting him is also too low, that his brow bone really matched Kratos's, which it does, because that's very hard. There's certain things that are harder to do on a face, and that, especially if you have to express emotion, to like put a fake brow bone and stuff didn't seem like a very good idea. So with we had a great styling and costume team too. They are the people who did Snow White and the Huntsman. So we just really had some top-notch costumers and stylists that helped make this transformation possible.
I'm not sure. Ooh, is this last name Brandon White? Is that him?
That's probably him.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sad
I can pull this up.
I should
Well,
remember his name.
we're just gonna look at a bunch of super beefy dudes in a second here, so you guys be prepared
what
for
you
this.
get
I'm
on
just
the
getting ready for
future.
this. Yes. You never know
Who
where
wants to talk about typefaces? But you could look at.
super beefy dudes. Here we go. Boom. All right. Can we see this? Oh shoot! Right when you clicked. Is this him?
That would be, yes. That
Whoa.
is he. Yeah. So. But you see it in the eyes, don't you?
I'm sorry, guys. I accidentally pulled up my profile picture. My bad. Okay. You can see it in the eyes? Yeah, I'm sure that's what's happening here right now. All right, that's him. That's Kratos. Man, he is ripped. Holy cow. Okay, all right.
Professional.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. So I have some more questions for you in terms of directing, like what that must be like. I remember when I first was getting into this industry, I didn't have any real knowledge about cinematography, editing, what it means to be a director on set. So it was a pretty steep learning curve. And you wind up on set. So for somebody who's watching this right now, who can't even fathom like what it is to be on set, kind of in charge of so many people and responsibilities, and you have your day and you have to make your day. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that transition, please?
Well, I was fortunate that sort of like being present on sets before having to shoot myself was helpful. Like I would, sometimes do kind of second unit duty on Kyle's sets when I was starting out. We'd have a lot of tabletop going on. And also, it can't be underestimated, we'd shoot things ourselves. Like, a lot of times we didn't have the money for a big, quote, official shoot with a big crew like that. That's sort of on the higher end, what you just saw with God of War. And we'd be doing our own kind of tabletop or run and gun or going out ourselves and grabbing things. And that's all hugely important because like us, there's a certain efficiency on a set that needs to happen. Like you mentioned, you have to make your day. There's a pressure to like get all your shots organized and get them done. But I think it's just one of those things where you do just learn by doing, just being on as many sets as possible. Like, so I was on sets and experiencing them even before being responsible for it, and just seeing different styles of different directors, seeing how different shoots are organized, how it's different being on a stage versus a location. Every set is sort of different. The actors are often different. Some will, I had a friend who was shooting a trailer that, boom, after one take, that actor was gone. Whereas I had the delightful Steve Buscemi, who was just so mellow and great the whole day. So it really, it's like being ready for all those variables and being able to be clear and know what. I think it's important to kind of just know what you want in your own mind, so you know it when it's happening and when you can catch it and when it's time to move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's awesome. There's a bunch of questions coming in for Imaginary Forces, so I want to give a shout out to whoever is doing your social media who's watching this on behalf of IF, answering all these questions about internship opportunities. It's getting all clogged up in the chat window.
Please apply for our internship opportunities.
Yeah.
We love interns.
This live
Some
stream,
of them even stay.
This live stream is one long recruitment video for Imaginary Forces.
Yes, exactly. That's why I wanted to do live.
Yeah, as we see Erica slip over her resume over to you.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I have to ask you about one of your heroes, and I was surprised to learn about this, but it was really cool. Once I figured it out, the connections made sense in my head. Can you talk about one of your heroes, Joan Ganz Cooney?
Yes, Joan Ganz Cooney is the woman who started Sesame Street, and she's my hero for so many things. One, she started Sesame Street, and it's just that was the show of my childhood. It was a marvelous introduction to mixed media content, basically like puppetry and all that. She had stop motion, animation, and all those jingles and songs like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, like these stick with you in a lifetime. And related to that, she didn't do this one, but is like the whole Schoolhouse Rock series, which is
which I love.
Yeah. So she's my hero for doing that. But not only that, then the more I did a paper on her in school, and so I researched her life, and I just became even more, I would put her up even more as sort of this hero, because you realize that she couldn't have said when she was a little girl that, I'm going to go into edutainment, like the way, because we take for granted now there's all these networks and shows that do children's television in a really fun, creative, commercial way almost, that measure up to the best of entertainment, right? There's whole channels of this, right? But back when she launched the show, I think it was 1968, the model for children's television was so different. Usually, it was more of a howdy-doody model, or like maybe a teacher would be talking to a screen. There was definitely children's television that was educational, but she really, if you read about her, the legend has it that she was at a dinner party and she and somebody else were looking at the kids, and they were totally memorizing all the advertising on television, all the jingles, and they're like, what if we could use the best craft people, the best artists that are doing things in advertising and commercially, and bring them in and do this children's show. And that's what she did. And so I don't know if you've realized, but on Sesame Street, at the end they say this episode, I don't know if they still do it this way, but when I was a kid, they would end each episode saying this episode was brought to you by the letter A and the number 2. And you'd realize all those little short films were supposed to be commercials for the letters. Mm-hmm. So she's basically making these commercials for the letters and with all these fun animations. And of course, really giving, Jim Henson his biggest break and just inventing this genre, which basically, MTV owes a debt to, of like a short format snippet blast of content that's just visually experimental. And plus there's tons and tons and tons of bad puns in Sesame Street. I like the 2-level thing, right?
Yes.
Like the Pixar thing where you have something for the kids, but then little asides for the adults and stuff.
Yeah, I love that story, and I didn't know this about her. And here's a picture of her in case people on the internet were wondering. And this is her name.
Yes.
Okay, so she's a legend, and I love that she was sitting there and she was watching how kids behave and looking at something that might be a plight on society in terms of the advertising, the brainwashing that happens with kids, but also realizing the effectiveness of something that's on repetition, writing jingles and slogans. And so she used the mechanics of advertising to teach, which was phenomenal. And this is a true pioneer, right?
Yeah, no, it's great to take something and then just give it that little twist and it's totally something more meaningful or new. I think that's great. And then also too, because students or people ask about design careers, and like we talked about this before, Chris, like we didn't know we were heading into what would later be regarded as a revolution for motion design and film and design combined. And when we were just starting out, there was no After Effects and stuff. And I think about that now, like, wow, we didn't know what we were getting into. She didn't know what she was getting into. People who are app designers couldn't have said 15 years ago they were going to be app designers. It's just being aware of those opportunities and these new forms of media and, and playing with them until you find the way that clicks for you. And I think she really did that. And so when I speak to students and, just putting in their mind that there's that flexibility that, that you don't need to, there isn't necessarily this need to decide, like in your first few years, exactly what you're going to be making.
Okay, so in the spirit of edutainment, because
that's such a great word.
Right, I love it. This show sometimes can be entertaining or whatever. So let's educate now. Let's focus on the edu part. So as a veteran, as an early pioneer in the main title space, what do you look for? What do you consider the key traits of a good, successful main title design? Can you give us your top 3?
Oh, top 3. Something I love.
What are the traits? No, the traits. Like where we want. Like let's say I'm watching this at home. I'm an aspiring main title designer, and I was thinking, gosh, my work, I think it's good, but how do I know? What are you looking for when you create a main title?
Well, I think the thing I look for most is that does this main title truly describe this show? And is an ideally unique to this show.
Okay.
So, for instance, I kind of have this little test. I'm like, if this main title can run in front of a different show, then it's probably not specific enough, or it's probably not unique enough, right? It's something that came up in Boardwalk Empire. Like, there's a lot of shows about the mob and organized crime and stuff. So what were the things that made this show different? Well, the main character did, the fact that it was in a seaside setting, if I could put that same main title in front of like Scarface or something, then I think it's lacking something.
I see.
So I think, each title sequence or each design project for that matter in its ideal form is unique to that project, And so when you're working even on a brand or another story or, just take a step back and be like, oh, is this generic, So I think, I think the very best title sequences, they really encapsulate the unique aspects of the show. So, one of my favorites of all time is Dexter. That is
love that
show. Love that title. Very clever. And also like it can't really, you can modify it and be on different shows, but it's really specific to that character. Catch Me If You Can is wonderful. I remember going to work when Catch Me If You Can came out, and somebody said to me, "Oh, I hadn't seen the film yet. Oh, I just saw Catch Me If You Can in the theater. You're gonna wish you did those titles." And they were right. They were really great, and I think they work on so many levels, but partially because it's so true to that time period, as is Mad Men. You know, like they use that period very smart in a very smart way, and it's sort of amazing. They tell you the whole story at the front of the film, but you don't even know you're watching the whole story. Like watch it again. Like every episode of his antics is told to you, but you just don't know what you're looking at. And it's sort of brilliant in that you can watch basically a mini version of the whole film. And they didn't even sometimes they, you do that at the end of the film, which is still great, but they just put up front. It was so stylized, but it really captured a feeling. And the craftsmanship is just amazing. I think, there's the idea to me, like the appropriateness to the material, then the idea, like I do like a little, if there's something clever with the idea, some clever metaphor, some clever, I think Dexter's a total aha moment sort of piece. They don't all have to have that, but that's, but basically, even if it doesn't pay off as a surprise, like some sort of idea is nice, I think. And then, the craftsmanship, I think, down to like the typography of the titles. I mean, everything should, be shot nicely or crafted, the animation done nicely and, feel well made.
Well, I love this. When you describe this whole idea of it being unique to the show, and I'm playing back Boardwalk Empire, the things that make it unique are Nucky Thompson, right? And the setting. And what they're talking about is it's all built around Prohibition. And so the bottles of liquor washing ashore up against his feet, you're not quite sure, is he taking over the empire or is something bad going to happen? So there's that lingering question. And unless you watch the whole series, then you realize, that's where the story goes.
Yeah, that was really satisfying. Like, I mean, around season 3, even people would be like, oh, I know why the title's like that. And honestly, we were just capturing those questions. But when people feel like it means even more down the line, that's also very satisfying. That the title can grow with the show in some ways, you know.
Can you expand a little bit more on what it is to create a clever metaphor that leads to surprise?
Yeah, I think so much of what we do, especially in short format content, is like trying to get an idea down, like a lot of ideas. Like these are very rich topics we're often dealing with. Stories with a lot of history, interesting characters. They go a lot of directions. But what you're often trying to do is capture a central idea, theme, or even emotion. Like kind of like boil it down and distill it into some some little nugget that would or icon that would represent the whole. And so to do that, like one of the things I like to do anyway is to think of a metaphor. Like, is there a symbol for this feeling or for this idea? Like, for instance, for this title Counterpart that we just did, there's this idea of like not knowing if your destiny is planned out for you, or is it something that you can, have an active role in? Are things predestined, or are you the master of your fate? And then parallel with that was the idea that the world had split into two, and there were parallel paths that you could take, sort of like a sliding doors thing, right? So this idea that, and also from reading the script, I knew the main character played Go, that board game, this very strategic board game. It's very much like, it's actually simpler than chess in the idea that there are less moves you can do with each piece. They can only move so, chess is rather complicated with all the different pieces. But because of that, there are many, many more combinations of moves and the way the game can go. So there's like, billions or so, Go game, possibilities.
Right.
And so combined with that, then we were thinking that, that metaphor of a split Go game of like pieces going in two different directions became sort of a central theme in our title for Counterpart. So it's like kind of like, is there something, I would say Game of Thrones, like even just like having a map, an ever-changing map of
like a game.
Like a board game. Exactly, is a way of like getting down this idea. And I have to say, it does require some discipline. It requires discipline on yourself and your team, and because often these shows or even these projects, these subjects they've got so many things. There's a temptation to want to include all of them, but I think editing is the great unsung art, whether you're actually editing a film or just editing down an idea, where it can't be everything all the time, but what are the most important things and what are you going to retain, and then work around that. Like, I'm so glad that Game of Thrones didn't like try to cut in at sumptuous photography, you know? Like there could have been a whole different direction where it could have gone totally, you know, over the top with, you know, it's a gorgeous show. But they had showed some restraint by like, oh, okay, we're going to keep this as a board game. Keep this in this very specified language, you know, or Mad Men, you know, there's fantastic sets and period pieces. Should we show any of that? Should we show the, you know, the great looking actors? But like, no. Let's keep to the central idea of a man falling, and that's his, you know, that says something. And I think that takes some discipline and some courage in some ways, because it is tempting to be like, oh, we want some of this and then we want some of that, and you know, then you have a whole kettle of things, and maybe it's not as strong as if you had stuck to sort of like one theme.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like those titles, looking at them after the fact, are the ones that get all the accolades and the respect of our peers. So again, you're talking about restraints, where it takes a lot of discipline to kind of not add all the stuff in and make it more muddled or complicated. I just want to tell you, Steve Ramirez, what he said. He says, Karin Fong is a straight up boss. You will be my mentor even though you don't know it. Ha, ha, ha. Awesome story.
I'm looking for you now.
hey, since Matthew stepped into the studio, Matthew, are there questions that we want to ask?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Far away.
Aaron, Matt, he stepped out. We swapped. He tagged me in. There was one from Dan, because I know, Karin, you've worked on a range of types of commercials and spots now. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular area, whether that's CGI or live action, that puts you out of your comfort zone? Is there anything that you're tackling these days that you feel puts you out of your comfort zone?
Oh, it's all out of my comfort zone. I feel like live action, I have so much. I mean, there's always a different challenge with each shoot. I never feel like I've mastered anything, frankly. But one of the more exciting things is that with a shoot, you know, you're probably a designer like I am, where you were trained in like totally manipulating everything with your hands, right? You're kerning. For God's sakes, we care about the space between the W and the A. It's not quite this, you know. When you're on a set, it's like learning, and I'm still learning this, like it's a living thing, you know, like, oh, you planned it in your head this way, but the actor is saying it, the talent is saying it this way. Oh, but that's kind of better, right? Or like the God of War, I remember I scoped that location on like a blisteringly hot day, and it was so cold when we actually went there like a week later to shoot, and it was so windy. But then it turned out to be like, I was like, oh my gosh, like nobody's going to want to take, I was dealing with a little girl in a sundress. Nobody's going to want to take their coat up. She's going to look cold the whole time. But, you know, you work through it. I remember taking her in the van and giving her this pep talk. And I don't know if that was what did it, but, you know, she managed to do that.
Wait, hold on. What was the pep talk? I'm the little girl. It's cold outside, Karin. Miss Fong, it's cold. What are you going to say to me?
I was in the moment. What would I have said? We're just like...
You in the front. Give me a grunt.
Yeah, exactly. You know, here's a piece of candy. No. But, you know, and then it turned out better than I could have imagined, because like the wind... You know, 1,000 fans couldn't have done that win, and it was so much nicer to look at. Mm-hmm. Like as our cinematographer who was also shooting Captain America, so he knows. Well, you know, and he also did District 9. He's really, you know, fantastic. It was like, oh, you get so many things for free, but you know, because you can't plan those things, and some of them are quote happy accidents, and you know, so and sometimes, you know, there are things like, oh wow, I showed up to a shoot where there was a hockey player. I wish I knew that hockey player was left-handed. Wow, hockey sticks are left or right-handed. Right, so there's like things you learn all the time. But I think that's what's actually really fun about shooting. It's like you can't, like, especially for us, like we are so into like, you know, it can be so planned and so prescribed that every storyboard moment and every angle. And I still think I come to a set more like that than somebody who's a little more free. You know, there's all different styles of directing. But that still puts me out of my comfort zone, not knowing exactly what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, Chip, your boss wants to know. Chris, there's a team in IF's conference room right now waiting for Karin to review some work in progress. Is there a ETA on when she's coming back? No, you can't have her back, Chip. We're rolling. This
Why
is
don't we do it live, like live stream critique?
Yes, show the work, and then Karin will critique it.
Yeah.
Send us a
Everybody
link.
on the stream has to sign an NDA, though.
Exactly.
That's right.
You know the business.
Okay, I got another question for you. You've worked on a bunch of film titles. I was looking up your IMDb. It was too long to list. And then you've done a bunch of TV titles, too. What do you prefer, film titles or TV titles?
Oh gosh, it all depends on what is set up with the filmmaking or the show running team. It's so funny. In my beginning of my career, I'd always be asked what kind of projects I like the best, and I remember what I'd always say is you don't know. It comes down to your particular collaborators and your clients. For once, so early on in my career, I remember being so somehow I was doing these. I was going to do these spots for Janus mutual funds, right? And my first impulse was oh my goodness, mutual funds. I have to do a series of mutual funds ads. They're just going to be really dry. They're going to be, they're not going to give me the creativity that I do with the film work or, some of those things. And it turned out because of the relationship we had with FCB, who was the agency, and their relationship actually with the mutual fund, they were some of the most fun projects I had ever done. I ended up doing 12 of these, and we would have back of the envelope ideas let's pretend the stock market's a roller coaster. Great, let's do that as a metaphor. And then the writer would write a script to that, and we'd present it. He presented to their client, and the mutual fund company said great, and they were all into having it done in a kind of psychedelic color palette and a very graphic style, and not a traditional what you would think of with a bank or a mutual fund. And so it just goes to show it's really the actual specifics of of the project. I can't say there's a category. I have to say that movie titles and television titles are a little bit different in some ways. It just in the nature of the design of them, the television title is a little bit, you hope that the show goes on for years, right? So you're designing with an eye out that there's an arc of the season and that's going to be played. You don't actually know all the episodes it's going to be played in front of, right? Whereas a movie title, it's a very, very specific time in the movie. So, whether it's the very first thing up or after a particular scene to liven things up or telling a particular backstory, it's never, television title, every week it's in front of a different scene because the episode changes. But the movie title is it's very, very specific. So it's almost a different storytelling challenge.
Yeah. So I was just sitting there staring at the screen thinking about Janus Funds, right? Janus Funds.
Yeah.
And here you are in our studio, and how our relationship has totally changed because we did pitch on that job and we lost it to you guys. So it hurts a little bit right now, Things have changed. But Chip, you may not get her back for other reasons. Who knows? She left here fine. I don't know what happened afterwards.
There's a great snack closet here and a ping pong table.
That's right. And room to roam. Okay, I have another question for you. And I think this is really relevant, especially what's going on right now. You're a mom, you're married, you work, you're successful. Talk to us, share with us your secret to success. How do you balance all this stuff?
Wow, the balance. Do I?
Don't break the mic on that one.
Maybe.
It didn't do anything to you.
I'm fortunate. I'm part of a partnership. I'm married. My husband takes a lot of our responsibilities too. We have a full-time nanny. I'm fortunate to be working in a situation. I've worked, as you've heard, at Imaginary Forces for years, and so we have shorthands of working with the teams there and my collaborators. So that is a very comfortable, situation. But it's hard. I think it's the whole idea of balance, whether it's with your kids or with your other interests or your social life, or everybody needs some degree of that. And as this profession can be quite consuming. I think for me anyway, I feel. You mentioned earlier that there are, that constraints can actually help you in some ways. And I don't know why I always quote this, and maybe it's just an urban myth, but apparently, football players do better in their grades when they're in season, right? When they're playing football in season. Common sense you might think, why wouldn't they do better when they're off season? Because they would have more time to study. But studies have shown that with the practices and the rigor of a schedule, that they actually do better when they're playing season and playing football and doing their work. Again, could be an urban myth. We have to Google this, but
it's a good story though.
Right? Good illustration, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's some things of the constraints that help me a little bit. I would used to, and then it's about just getting more experience, right? I used to sit at a computer when I didn't have an idea. back in the old days when I'd have my manual out trying to do things, and I also didn't have an idea. Sometimes I wouldn't take a break and do something else. I would just sit and try to push through it, which is a legitimate problem-solving strategy. But for me, I learned that I didn't have to do that. I could let my brain go somewhere else and come back to something. And that's something you learn with experience, right? Like you can manage yourself more efficiently. So that helps. But, there are late nights and early mornings and times where, maybe I can't travel as much as I had before. I used to be in our New York office, but I would travel all the time back here to LA. And that kind of constant travel isn't really on my my schedule anymore. So there are definitely, trade-offs with that. But in terms of the balance, I think it's just, that sink or swim sort of thing we were talking about before. I mean, you just kind of have to, put your mind, put your mind down and do it. But I have to say, having help. I remember before having a baby, I did have conversations and interviews with other designers who were mothers and ask what was most helpful. And, they would just give me some of their opinions, which would range everything from getting, somebody who can help you and not being embarrassed about that and not having, and really investing in the child care, to making sure you still went into the studio and don't think that you could necessarily work at home, because, which I find was helpful because, there's a temptation, when you have a small baby, maybe you'll just work at home, but then sometimes the distraction makes it so maybe you're not fully with the child nor at work,
right.
And everybody's different. So I don't want I hesitate to say this is advice for anybody, but I'd say anybody thinking about just to talk to people in their industry or around their work or other designers they admire and see if they have tidbits like that, because that helped me be oh, okay. I was hell-bent on I guess I should build a home studio. And then I talked to one woman who had a whole brownstone in New York, and she's like, I'll work at home. Are you kidding? The child will always know you're there and be banging on the door. You won't get something done. I was like, oh, just getting different perspectives.
Matthew, let's take one more question from our audience. Otherwise, I have one more thing before we let Karin go. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people. I'm costing IF a lot of money. This is my revenge plan. They don't know this, but yes.
I have a question, but I think it would unravel and open up another big thing. But I'm just trying to make sense of Dan's last question here. It's a really layered question, but I think in essence, the question is, if you were back in school, you're back at square one, you have none of your portfolio and you're starting over, where would you begin today?
Ooh, that's a good question.
How would you break into the industry today? If you wanted to do what you're doing now and you don't have the same portfolio and all that stuff, where would you start?
So when you say, can I just clarify, when you say break into the industry, do my particular job or break into the kind of design, motion, film industry in general?
Yeah, just breaking into the design and motion.
Let me take a stab at rephrasing the question. Let's see if I can get the sentiment out, because this question happens all the time. So people are wondering, yeah, sure, Karin's amazing, awesome experience. She went to great schools and all that kind of stuff. So it's hard for me to relate. So if Karin is 21, 22 years old again, fresh out of school, very kind of skinny portfolio, and you wanted to get a job at Imaginary Forces or one of these other companies, what are you going to do? How do you do that?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, make things that you like. I think it's very important that you're just making, I didn't really have a plan when I did that interactive alphabet book, except I love to do my own goofy doodles and I like to make them move, and I found a way to structure that into a project. So make things that you like, and don't have to make things that you think other people will like. Some people come, I don't know, they think they have to make a broadcast design package or something, which is great if that's what you want to do, but they or a certain kind of work because they feel like that's what people need to see. I think you're also, trying to figure out what part of the business you want to be in, whether you want to be, are you more an ideas person? Are you more of a, and these things can overlap, of course. Do you love working with music and editing? Are you an animator? And and speaking for myself, when I was younger, I didn't know what part necessarily that would be. I knew I liked ideas. I thought maybe I'd animate more. My first job, of course, was animating at WGBH. When I was at RGA, I quickly realized that other people are so much better at animating. In fact, at one point, Kyle said to me, like, well, we can hire somebody for that. Don't animate. Like, I wasn't good enough, really, to animate my own ideas, which is, put me on that other trajectory. Like, I don't know. I thought you just, you're doing all the stuff yourself a lot of times in school, so you don't know, exactly maybe where you want to focus. People ask me all the time, like, should I be doing 3D? I'm like, well, try it. Do you like 3D? It's not a requirement that you have to do 3D. If you're more of a typographer, maybe there's there's that part of the business. So I think it's making things is going to help you realize what aspect of it you like. And I think in terms of what to make, I mean, it could be anything from your animated Christmas card or Valentine or something, or getting voiceover to something you like and animating to that. I think if you need a deadline, I think there's many different, venues or even causes or places you could kind of set up a deadline for yourself. But I think it's important to show people that work that you like, because, and this was a very important piece of advice somebody gave me, or my professor gave me when I left school as well, is, the work you do, I mean, it seems so obvious, but it's worth saying. It's like the work you do set in the beginning sets the tone for the work you do later. So, if you're not you want to do kind of funny, humorous, character-based work, but you don't have any of that in your portfolio, then you should try, you should be trying to show some of that stuff, because it's a hard leap for somebody to look at your, infographics portfolio and see that you really want to be a character designer. I mean, that sounds really obvious, but it's so interesting. Like, I ran into somebody at this metal thing, actually, that I interviewed with when I was a student. And he remembered, we were reminiscing, and I remember even going to see him, and my work was kind of quirky and funny, and luckily he did quirky and funny design. But he said, I see so many people come in here with like beautiful financial books, or because at the time doing annual reports and stuff is what you did as a graphic designer, and it's not in any way funny or witty, but people are like, I want to do humorous design, and I just don't, it's just hard. It's hard. It's not impossible. But it's just hard to hire somebody when you don't, see a glimmer of that there. So make things you like, and then show us the things that you like most, and edit. You don't get extra credit for having 20 pieces in your portfolio instead of 10. In fact, we'd rather see your 5 best ones, because that also shows that what is good. Because sometimes you'll look at work, and like if you have 7 pieces and like 3 are outstanding but 2 are kind of bad and 1's okay, you're like, does this person even know what's good in their portfolio? Are they, was it lucky, or those 3 good because they had a really good teacher that time? Intern, like a lot, or PA, like some of our best, collaborators have been people who have come in as interns or PAs, and just, again, the learning by doing is like, you can't underestimate that. I think if you're willing to, work hard, intern, and put some time into what you feel is your strength. Like, we always ask our interns, like, what's the part that you like to do? We'll push them into other ways just because that's fun and you never know. But, some people are really, they really want to do photorealistic CG, and that's great. We'll get them on the projects that do that. Or somebody else is like more about, typography and like kind of fashiony stuff, like, great, but just having an idea of like the kind of work you want to do helps.
Excellent. I'm taking notes here in case you guys can hear me clickety-clack on the keyboard here. Because, it's getting near the end of our show, and I know I can talk to you for a really, really long time. Well, first of all, I want to... No, I'll save this for the end. Let's do the show recap. Matthew, unless you have that crazy big question you want to ask.
I want my prize.
We'll do that off air. I promise. I'm a man of my word. We'll do that off air. Okay? So here we go. Let's do the show summary. You just said this, so I just typed this part out. Do the work that you want to get more of and edit. 5 good pieces are better than 20 that are not so good. And your tips for title design. If you guys want to get into the exciting world of title design, here's what you need to do. 1, does it describe the show? Is it true to the central theme or emotion? Is it unique to the show? This is the biggest takeaway for me. Looking at the character, the setting, the storyline. Does it foreshadow elements within the story itself? Easier to do in a main title, a little bit harder to do on a TV series, right? And can you come up with a clever metaphor and it leads to a surprise? And the way you do that, according to Miss Fong here, is to find a parallel device, right?
Yeah.
And make sure it's like well crafted. Okay, so before we wrap up the show, I want to tell everybody this episode was brought to you by the letter I and the letter F. Okay? Hey, I'm working over here. I am working over here. That's what I'm going to say. Look, if you guys want to find out more about the amazing work, and yes, she did direct and design the main titles for Lost in Space, the new TV show relaunch. Is that right?
That is correct.
Boom, because a lot of people are loving that. I saw that in the chat window. So go to imaginaryforces.com, and Karen, she has 2 different accounts, one for Twitter and one for Instagram.
I couldn't grab the same one.
Yeah, you were kind of late on that, right?
Exactly.
Late on that train.
Yeah, I slept.
So
I
at
slept that day.
Karen _Fong. Is she not a prolific tweeter?
No,
you guys
I've got like 12 tweets. So,
Yes, I looked
so
at
maybe
that.
give them the IF one on your side or something.
They'll figure that one out. You can also see some of her pictures at Karen.Fong on Instagram. Karen, here's the last thing. Here's how I want to wrap it up. It took years, literally years, and so many calls. And I'm driving. I'm like, let me just call Karen out of the blue. And you just didn't want to come on the show for 1,000 different reasons. I'm sure you're a busy woman. Let me just ask, because I want to do this, because I'd like to have more people like you on the show. Did we make you feel comfortable? Was it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
No, it was great. I was scared with the live stream now, but I'm and I'm still scared. But I encourage I encourage all would-be interviewees for this live stream to bite the bullet and head on over
You can do it.
here to Blind and give it your best.
All right. With that, thank you very much on behalf of everybody tuning in live, myself, Matthew, Aaron, and Erica on the team. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause, you guys. Rockstar in the house. Woo!
Let's hear you grunt.
Okay. All right. Enough, you guys. Let's get us out of the show, and we're gonna end the show. And here we go. Oop, come on, Chris. Come on.